Just to get started, I'm going to recapitulate the Campbell and Skinner arguments. You've seen this before, but I want to go over it again just to set up the discussion. Campbell says moral responsibility entails moral responsibility entails freedom of will. Moral responsibility entails the existence of free will. If there is no such thing as free will, there is no moral responsibility. And some people find that scary, apparently. Free will entails two things. One, capability of acting, capability of doing the act you're going to do. That should be obvious. And also entails the other thing is capability of doing otherwise. And I'm going to leave a little gap here. I'm going to leave a little dotted, like a little fill-in line. And later in the lecture, I'm going to put in a little extra thing here, a little extra note. I'm going to change this. Campbell says free will entails that I could do it and that I could do otherwise. And that's right. But Campbell forgets something about that could do otherwise. There's something here that Campbell has not mentioned. And understanding that thing is crucial to understanding just exactly how Campbell goes wrong. Now, Campbell is an incompatibilist. Campbell, for no reason I can discern, believes that determinism rules out the could do otherwise. Determinism rules out the capability to do other than what you do. I'm putting this note Campbell. This is in red. This is not something I think. This is not something that's true. This is just something that Campbell thinks. If you look at think about the implications of this statement, even in the simplest action, right? Say I choose to drop or not drop this pen, right? I've got the pen, I'm going to drop it. In fact, I choose to drop it. Now, Campbell says if that was a determined action, I was incapable of doing otherwise. If I had, if somehow I had decided not to drop the pen, Ninja would have dropped from the ceiling and slapped my knuckles with the back of a katana and made me open my hand and do that. Or someone would have rushed up, grabbed my fingers, pulled them off the pen. That's what it means to say that an action is not free-willed. If you say that an action you did was not free-willed, you have to be saying that somebody or something else made you do it. Right? It was involuntary. So either it was, I would have a muscle spasm, I'm going to drop the pen. No, I decided not to drop the pen. Oh! Muscle spasm. According to Campbell's logic, if we take Campbell's logic seriously, he is saying the existence of determinism now affects the future behavior of the rest of the universe such that something will come in and make you do something you decided not to do. If you think that makes no sense whatsoever, yes, you're right, it makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, but on with Campbell's argument. Determinism rules out the capability to do otherwise. So, determinism rules out free will. Again, Campbell, Palmer, so, determinism rules out free will. Okay. Incompatibilists believe, on the basis of no argument that I can discern, that determinism rules out free will, and so determinism rules out moral responsibility. They believe this passionately. I put this in red because I think it's false. And I want to emphasize, I don't say this. This is not the official position of this course. This is something that I believe is false. You don't have to agree with me, but you do have to know that I'm telling you right now that this is false. And from this, from the purported fact that determinism rules out moral responsibility, Campbell concludes that determinism is false. I want you to contemplate that step of logic. I'll come back and comment on it later. Basically, there are two logical errors in this argument. Two. I'm going to talk about both of them, but I want you to try and see if you can see them before I point them out. Now, on the other hand, on the other side of the argument, I'm going to put up B.F. Skinner's argument, and it's better than Campbell's in that it only makes one logical error. There's mounting evidence that human behavior is predictable. True. That's why I put it up in black. Anything predictable is determined. Again, this is a rock-solid logical principle. because it is simply impossible to predict the behavior of a random system. It is simply impossible to predict an event that is randomly caused. If it's a random process, you cannot predict what will happen. The only way you can ever have a predictable system is if that system is deterministic. And if you have a system that's partially predictable and partially unpredictable, you know for certain that the predictable part is determined. The unpredictable part might also be determined. Being determined doesn't make anything predictable. Systems can be completely deterministic and totally unpredictable, because predictability is a human capacity to tell what is going to happen next. Moral responsibility requires free will. If there is no free will, there's no moral responsibility. You cannot hold someone morally accountable for something that he was coerced into doing. Skinner is also an incompatibilist. Skinner subscribes to the myth that determinism rules out free will. He believes this just as Campbell and Palmer believe this. He also believes, with Campbell, that determinism rules out moral responsibility. And his conclusion is the other end of this of this logical chain, of this chain of exclusions. So Skinner concludes that moral responsibility doesn't exist. There is no moral responsibility. Skinner's book, one of his books, had the wonderful title, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, saying we're understanding human behavior. And basically, ideas like freedom and dignity are a form of mythology. They're illusions, or they're uncomforting beliefs that we cling to make ourselves feel better. Really scary stuff. Skinner thought that science was proving that there is no human freedom, that there is no human dignity, there is no moral responsibility. He thought science was eliminating huge categories of thought. Half of philosophy, in fact. But there's a logical flaw here. There's a logical mistake here. And it's the same, and Campbell makes the same mistake. Yes? Anyone want to take a guess at, yeah?
Is it because they believe in predestination?
Well, no, nobody here believes in predestination. Predestination is something that's not a topic in this class. Predestination is a radically different concept. Predestination is the idea that God chooses ahead of time whether or not you will be saved. So you could try to be a good Christian, but it's really could be futile because God's already decided you're going to hell. You're not saved. Now, the reason you try to be a good Christian is because you're supposed to. You should. And some people are visibly saved. The reason we know that God picked them out for salvation ahead of time is that they're so good at being Christian right now. That's sort of like evidence that they were already saved. But you cannot, there's nothing you can do by your own efforts to get yourself into heaven. You're either going or you're not. Yes, Corey?
Is that only if you believe in Christianity or you don't?
That's what they believe about everybody.
Christians don't believe that you can't do anything.
Some do. The ones who believe in predestination. Look up John Calvin and Presbyterianism. Look up predestination. But after class, not during class. Basically, any statement that begins with the words Christians don't believe will only refer to a segment of Christians. It might be the majority of Christians, or it might be a very small group of Christians. There's a lot of stuff that Christians have believed, people who refer to themselves as Christians have believed. And predestination was a very, very important topic in the development of the Reformation. So if you study the Reformation, you study Calvinism. Calvin, by the way, he was a nasty man. He was a horrible, horrible person. He was not Scottish. I want to point this out. John Calvin was French. He was not Scottish. So they don't believe it. Nobody here believes in predestination. What they believe in is incompatibilism, which is the idea that if your decision is determined, it cannot be free will. Now, Campbell makes two mistakes, only one of which is made by Skinner. Skinner makes a mistake over here, Campbell makes the same mistake over here, and Campbell makes one additional mistake. Now, what is the mistake that Campbell makes but Skinner doesn't? Well, let's put it this way. Imagine this hypothetical situation in which you go into, in which we have the belief that basketball playing and cheese production are mutually incompatible. Basketball playing rules out cheese production, and cheese production rules out the playing of basketball. So if there's a factory making cheese in Southern California, no basketball can be played whatsoever. Now suppose we have two people, Campbell and Skinner, and we go around Orange County and LA and we see mountains of cheese, tons of cheese everywhere. And Campbell steps forward and says, okay, cheese rules out basketball. And we haven't seen a single basketball game, by the way. There's all this cheese, we haven't seen a single basketball. And Campbell says, cheese rules out basketball, so obviously there's no cheese here. And Skinner says, well, look, here's tons of cheese. Cheese rules out basketball, so there's no basketball. Who's giving the lunatic argument? Right? Now, Campbell versus Skinner in our world. Both believe that determinism rules out free will. Campbell says, determinism rules out moral responsibility. So determinism is false. Skinner says determinism rules out moral responsibility. We have tons of evidence of human predictability. That implies, that is also tons of evidence for human determinism, for volitional determinism. Therefore, there's no free will. Who's giving the lunatic argument? Campbell has, look, think about the reading. In that reading, did Campbell, did Palmer say one word about evidence that moral responsibility exists? Was there one word about that? No, there was not. This thing rules out this thing. We have evidence for this thing, but the fact that these two things rule out means that this thing that we have evidence for doesn't exist, and this thing that we don't have evidence for does exist. That is bass-ackwards. That's mistake number one. That is the mistake that Campbell makes that Skinner doesn't. No evidence is given for the existence of moral responsibility. Why does Campbell think that moral responsibility exists? I don't think he even thinks about it. So that's mistake number one, and Campbell is the only one who makes it. What's mistake number two? What's the mistake they both make? Well, they're incompatibilists, and I believe that's a mistake. Now, inside Campbell's moral responsibility argument is the closest thing I've ever seen to an argument for incompatibilism. And I emphasize it's close. It isn't actually an argument for incompatibilism. It's basically an assumption of incompatibilism in different words. Remember, if you're going to say that two things are incompatible, if you're going to believe, want other people to believe that basketball rules out cheese production, that oxygen makes breathing impossible, then you have to give an argument. You can't just say, well, oxygen rules out breathing because breathing and oxygen are incompatible. And if there's oxygen in the room, you can't breathe. See, I've proved it. Well, free will entails capability of acting and capability of doing otherwise. If I am determined, if a deterministic process leads me to drop this pen, and that was determined, if I had opened my hand, the pen would have stayed there. Or if I tried to, if I tried to hold on to the pen, I would have spasmodically released it. Or someone would use a mind control ray on me to make me do it. Someone would have, if I had chosen to do otherwise, I would have been coerced into it. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. The thing that eliminates free will is constraint and coercion. Capability of doing otherwise. Does determinism rule out the capability of doing otherwise? If I have a deterministic process that makes me drop the pen, does that deterministic process rule out the possibility of holding on to the pen and not dropping it? Right? If it was a deterministic process that made me drop the pen the first time, did that process make it impossible for me to have opened my hand if I had chosen to do so? or kept my hand closed? And the answer is no. Right? Campbell does not understand capability to do otherwise. Capable to do otherwise, capability of doing otherwise if I had so chosen. This is the definition of free will and capability. You do something of your own free will if you chose to do so, and you could have done otherwise if you had so chosen. That is, or to put it another way, you could have chosen otherwise. What does it mean to say, I could have chosen otherwise? It means that if I had chosen to do otherwise, I would have been able to do it. Joe robs the bank of his own free will if it is the case that at the moment he pulled out the gun, it was open to him. If he had chosen to put the gun back, he would have been able to do so. It's always a conditional. If you had chosen otherwise, you would have been able to do otherwise. That's what Campbell and Palmer don't understand. Determinism doesn't mean that you can't do otherwise. Determinism just means that you do what you do. You do what you do. In order for Campbell's argument to work, free will has to depend on being able to choose other than you choose. Being able to choose other than you choose. I choose to drop the pen. If I've chosen to drop the pen, am I capable of not choosing to drop the pen? Well, no, I chose to drop the pen. If you do one thing, you eliminate what else you do. But that happens if it happens at random, too. If I randomly happen to drop the pen from some process I have no control over, it wasn't free will, but I still could not have chosen otherwise. If it was random, right? If it was random, I still could not have chosen otherwise. So what goes on here? So here's basically the problem. If we want moral responsibility to exist, then we have to break incompatibilism, because we have tons of evidence for determinism and no evidence for the existence of moral responsibility. We also have tons of evidence for the existence of free will. But we've got this argument that we need to knock down in order for moral responsibility to exist. Because this is the crappy argument so far. This is the good one. Now, in the text, Campbell next goes to Heisenberg. See, part of the myth of incompatibilism is the idea that free will needs to be saved from determinism, that we need to save human free will. This is a bizarre attitude to me, because free will is a primary datum. Free will is a part of our experience. Determinism is also a part of our experience. We could not have experience if determinism was false. But free will is also equally a part of our experience. We experience ourselves making free will choices. We experience cases where we have to act against our will, where things we do that are not of our own free will. And we can tell the difference. And our society is built on this, and our society works. If we really could not tell the difference between a free-willed action and a non-free-willed action, we would not be able to run human society. So there's enormous evidence for free will. There's enormous evidence for determinism. Both exist, so they must be compatible. So think about someone who believes that basketball playing is incompatible with cheese production, and you show them a cheese factory right next door to a basketball game. There they're making cheese, there they're playing basketball. Look, both are going on at the same time. Proves they're compatible. You should not think that they're incompatible when you act on free will in a deterministic environment. But there's the people who subscribe to the incompatibilist myth think that they have to save free will. Oh my God, we want free will. Determinism surrounds us, but we want to have free will. Heisenberg's mistake. This may, by the way, be the only mistake Werner Heisenberg ever made. It's a doozy, but it's not in his area of expertise, so it doesn't make him an idiot. Remember, Werner Heisenberg was a brilliant theoretical physicist. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is one of the foundation stones of modern physics. It was an absolutely brilliant insight that made the problems of modern physics solvable. If no one had thought of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, if no one had thought of this, we would not have physics. We would not have digital watches or computers or digicams or any of the things that make life so much fun. Absolutely brilliant man who made a really silly mistake. But he's a physicist, not a philosopher, so you can't really beat him up for it. You do something random now. Kick the desk up. Hit the person. No, don't hit anyone. Lawsuit, lawsuit, lawsuit. Right. Fall asleep. Or if you're already asleep, wake up. Do a little dance. Have your head detached from your body and run around and fly around. I was watching Reaper last night, and the guy cuts this other dude's head off, and the body's wandering around like this. It's a good show. So, I mean, have something happen at random, and then do that a lot. First of all, you can't really act at random. You know, I was faking it when I threw the pen. It was the only random-looking thing I could do. I should have brought a silly hat or something, or I'm sad right now, so I don't feel like dancing. That wasn't really random. I invite you to imagine that you go to a chiropractor and he says, hey, I can give you free will. I will install a randomizer in your brain. And anytime you want to act of your own free will, you flip the switch at the back of your head and your brain starts firing at random. Would you have this installed? Would you have a randomizer placed in your head? Werner Heisenberg says you should jump at the chance because then you'll finally have free will. Indeterminism rules out free will. This is a rock solid fact. Should have written it in black because it's a fact. It is a rock solid fact that indeterminism destroys free will. If your brain is not deterministic, you lose free will. Clearly lose free will. Obviously lose free will. Unequivocally lose free will. There's no way out of it. Indeterminism, when you turn off determinism, you turn off free will. You turn off your brain, you turn off your existence, actually. The relationship between the relationship between determinism and free will is like the relationship between oxygen and breathing. You cannot breathe without oxygen, or an oxidizing agent, actually. You cannot have free will without determinism. You better hope your brain stays deterministic, because if it goes indeterministic, you disappear. You die, effectively. Now, for many of us, for many people, well, several, this settles the debate right there. Amazingly, for Donald Palmer and for several otherwise intelligent people, it doesn't. They make what I'm calling Palmer's mistake. Palmer believes, falsely, Palmer believes that determinism rules out free will. This is false, but it is passionately believed. Lack of determinism. Lack of determinism is known as indeterminism or randomness. It's all the same thing. Rules out free will. This is a fact. Does anyone think that you can have free will if what you do next in an action, if that action is totally random with respect to your aims and purposes and anything else in the world. Does anyone here believe that if an act fails to be determined by your aims and purposes, it can be free? Just imagine doing something at random. Something comes out of the blue and you do it. Is that a free act of yours? Can it be? And the answer is it cannot. So there's a third option. The brain is not deterministic, because that rules out free will, and it's not indeterministic, because that rules out free will, so it's something else. And he makes the diagram sort of like this. It's got necessity, it's got randomness, and he says there's a third option that he calls freedom. Now, what is the other word for now? Now, I want you to think about, to speculate on the motive for using the words necessity and randomness instead of determinism and indeterminism. You remember this diagram from the book, right? Did it look like it made sense when you saw it? Oh, necessity, randomness, freedom, cheese, crackers, flying monkeys. Why, there's hundreds of possibilities. Your brain is either operates under necessity, it operates under randomness, or it operates under freedom. What does this actually mean? What's the other word for necessity? Determinism. What's the other word for randomness? Indeterminism. Now, what does Palmer mean by freedom? It means that your brain can be in a situation, could be a system that is not deterministic, and it's not deterministic. I'll say that again. It's not deterministic, and it's not deterministic. So it's, well, let me put it this way. If you have a system that's not deterministic, what is it? Let's put it this way. If you know, it's not deterministic. It's not deterministic. I'm not saying it's not deterministic. I'm saying it's not deterministic. How about this? If a woman is not pregnant, she's pregnant, right? Is there a third state? No, there isn't. There's pregnant, not pregnant, and free. If a person is not dead, what are they? Not dead. They're dead. What if they're not alive? They are alive. The negatives cancel themselves out. This is philosophy. It's supposed to be logical. You can we use double negatives, right? And that's perfectly acceptable part of English unless you're in an English class. Can anyone give me an example of a double negative? I can't think of one.
Pretty ugly.
Pretty ugly. That's kind of a pun, but okay. She's pretty. Never mind, I'm not going to say that. He's pretty. Well, I can't think of a double negative. But when you're taking these things literally, if you take Palmer's logic literally, he's saying that your brain can be in three possible states. It can be in a state of determinism, it can be a state of indeterminism, and it can be in a third state that's not determinism, and it's not determinism. That violates a principle of logic, one of the oldest principles of logic, perhaps the first principle of logic ever enunciated. It goes back to Aristotle. It's called the law of the excluded middle. When you have a situation where you can have A or not A, that's it, right? When you put a not in front of something, you've exhausted the possibilities. Dead or not dead, no third choice. Pregnant or not pregnant, no third choice. Blue or not blue, square or not square, exploding or not exploding, a monkey or not a monkey. Right? Everything in the universe is either a monkey or a non-monkey. So this is why I call this Palmer's mistake. And it is possibly the dumbest thing ever said in a philosophy book. It's a leading contender for the dumbest thing ever said in a philosophy book. And I have seen some dumb stuff in philosophy books. In fact, there's a book I actually taught out of for 2 semesters before I got so sick of all the mistakes. It was full of dumb stuff, absolutely full of dumb stuff. But nothing it said was so dumb as to say, hey, we have this condition. You can be in this condition or you can be not in this condition, and there's a third state where you're not in the condition and you're not in the condition. Absolutely freaking bizarre. It still freaks me out. What's this? And what is his argument for this? Well, this doesn't give us free will. This doesn't give us free will, so there must be a third option. Do you ever see the movie A Weekend at Bernie's? Or ever hear about it? Right. And you can imagine, well, you can imagine the characters say, well, if Bernie's dead, we're screwed. And maybe there's something about it so that if Bernie's alive, they're screwed. If Bernie's dead, we're screwed. If Bernie's alive, we're screwed. Well, obviously there must be a third option. That is the weirdest damn reasoning I've ever seen. Now, how many of you, don't put your hands up, but to how many of you did that seem to make sense when you first saw it? Isn't that bizarre? This is what I mean by critical reading. Because if you're trained in logic, if you've got a background in logic, or you've got a background in philosophy, this should really jump out. Things like this should really jump out. Like he's saying, well, obviously 2 + 2 is 7. It has to be, because if it's not 7, something bad happens. Dude, suck it up. Right? If you have an argument that eliminates the existence of moral responsibility, the rational thing to do is to say, well, I don't think moral responsibility exists. And if we take Palmer's logic seriously, it doesn't. If this logic works, this isn't the answer. If determinism rules out free will, and lack of determinism rules out free will, what is the only really logical conclusion? What is the only logically possible conclusion? There is no free will. Incompatibilism. Incompatibilism implies there is no free will. There's no escape from this. Once you adopt incompatibilism, you adopt a view that implies there is no free will. Because if determinism rules out free will, it's combine that with the rock-solid fact that lack of determinism rules out free will. Those are your only choices. You know? People are either pregnant or not pregnant, alive or dead. Systems are either deterministic or not deterministic. No escape, no surrender. I'm all going to die. Okay, so like most philosophical problems, this one has basically been solved by a Scotsman. And it is, to me, a truly bizarre thing that the book talks about the obscure and difficult Ted Honderich, who I despair of even teaching, and ignores the famous and perfectly sensible argument of David Hume. I want to do it in a good color. So I like. Have I got a plaid pen? No green. I don't make green pens. I like green. Oh, good. Here we go. Purple. Now, I can't tell you where your volitional complex is. I don't know enough neuroscience to do that. But your volitional complex is my name for the part of your brain that comes up with volitions. So when I made that weird, there's weird motions with my hand, my volitional complex was making me do that, was sending the signals. Right? The volitional complex is the part of your brain that decides to send signals to your muscles to make you do stuff. My volitional complex is what's making me speak. It's what's making me choose the words I do and not other words. Your volitional complex is making you do whatever you are doing right now. Free will exists when processes inside your volitional complex play a dominant role in determining your actions. It's free will if a process inside your head made you do it. It's free will if you decided to do it and you did it. It's free will if you do it because you decided to do it. It's not free will if you didn't. free will is eliminated when free will is eliminated when something outside your volitional complex makes you do something different from what your volitional complex would make you do if the constraint wasn't there. Say you want to get backstage at a White Stripes concert. You walk up to the door, right? There's an open door, you're walking through, and a big guy comes out and says, "Where's your pass?" You say, "Well, I don't have one." "Go away." Okay, leave. "No, leave." Leave. Okay, you stand there seething against your will, because if you were not constrained, you'd go through the door and bother Jack and Meg. But there's a security guard, or roadie, or whatever he is, constraining you. You're in class, and you're enjoying the lecture, and ninja drop from the ceiling and drag you to the beach, or to a party. Ninja party, so you really can't see the other guests. They're all hiding in plain sight. Because when ninjas stop moving, they become invisible. Right? So you think you're in a room full of people, and there's no one there. Where did everyone go? And then they start moving again and say, "Ah, fooled you." Okay. But that's their only trick. Once they've done that a couple of times, you're really sick of seeing it. That's why pirates are better. Okay, so pirates drop from the ceiling and drag you off to a pirate party where there's singing, dancing, and rum. Lots of rum.
Once they sober up, they suck too.
What?
Once they sober up, they suck too.
Who says they ever sober up? You know the main attraction of piracy in the Caribbean? You could stay drunk all the time. You could stay drunk 24/7. As long as the ship wasn't in action, you could be drunk. It's how Calico Jack Rackham got taken. His crew, he and his crew were drunk. You know who put up the fight when Calico Jack was taken? He had 2 women in his crew, which was very unusual. He had 2 women in his crew. They put up resistance. Free will is eliminated when some force external to your volitional complex constrains or coerces your action. You guys know about OCD? Okay? So, say you have OCD. Now what you want to do, you go to the restroom, what you want to do is wash your hands thoroughly and then leave. But you've got OCD. So you wash your hands, you start to leave, you go back and wash them again. You go back and wash them again. You go back and wash them again. Now, arguably, that's not your free will. Because what your volitional what your volitional complex would do if you didn't have OCD would be just wash once and leave. But you can't. Something in your brain is going, no, wash again, wash again, wash again. So that, arguably, according to Hume, erodes your free will. It's a part of your brain making you do it, but it's not the part that normally handles volitions. There's a defect in there. It's not your free choice. Now, you can think it's free will, or you can think it's not free will. Either way is okay. But the point is, if it's outside your volitional complex, it's not your free will. So, any questions about this? Does anyone see any flaw in this definition of free will? Remember, this is a definition of free will that doesn't just accept determinism, doesn't just say that determinism and free will are compatible, it relies on determinism. This is a definition of free will that says, when your choices are determined by you, by the appropriate part of you, the appropriate part of your brain, when what you do is determined by your thinking process, you act on free will. When what you do is determined by something outside of your thinking process, that's not free will. So we have two competing deterministic processes. There's your volitional system inside your head, which consists of your hopes, dreams, fears, decisions, determinations. It consists of you. Your volitions are the clearest expression of your personality. So your volitional system basically includes your personality, your character, who you are, your soul. If there's a meaningful sense to the word soul, it's inside your volitional system, because it makes you the person that you are. And when your soul determines what you do, you act freely. When your soul is not determining what you're doing, you are not acting freely. This only works if it's determined. If your soul is disconnected from what you do, if what you do is random with respect to your soul, random with respect to the person you are, you do not have free will. Randomness kills free will. A lack of determinism for free will is like a lack of oxygen for breathing. What if this room's atmosphere was entirely nitrogen? No oxygen, just nitrogen. Could you breathe? What if your brain was indeterministic? Your brain lost the faculty of determinism. Could you act? Could you make a decision? And I'll let you think about that over the weekend. I'll see you Monday, and we will cover objections to Hume's theory, or attacks on soft determinism.